I would like to welcome everybody who is joining us from whether across the ocean or Europe. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to today's webinar, to another discussion devoted to Central and Eastern Europe, this time with a focus on NATO, and more specifically, the format B9. Our series is part of the Engaging Central Europe program of the German Marshall Fund, which is a non-partisan policy organization committed to the idea that the United States and Europe are stronger together. You can read more about the program on our website. And I would like to remind you that today's discussion will be recorded. You can find it later on our YouTube channel. And if you would like to be active in participating with questions, please write them in the chat. And hopefully we're going to answer all of them during today's discussion. My name is Asya Metodieva, and I will have the pleasure to moderate the discussion today. And now I will tell you a little bit more about the focus. As I mentioned, the Bucharest 9, the B9 format was established in 2015 in response to the evolving security landscape in Europe, particularly in light of Russia's military actions against Ukraine. This format includes 9 countries from the region: Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. And since 2022, the B9's priorities have included ensuring Ukraine's survival as an independent state and supporting its closer integration into the regional security architecture. The format is not very, it's less used in the EU's decision-making. However, it's a great venue for pushing for particular agendas within NATO, and to what extent this is done and how successful the format is. We are going to talk about these questions today. And some more questions, how B9 can contribute to strengthening NATO, and what should it be its focus in the next years. All these questions are for our speakers. One of them will present a very interesting paper on the topic titled "The Bucharest 9: Enhancing Security on NATO's Eastern Flank." You can find the link to the paper in the chat, and of course you can read the paper on our website. The research is part of the ReThink Central and Eastern Europe Fellowship. Let me introduce the author, Tomáš A, who is our fellow, part of the ReThink.CEE Fellowship. And 2 more speakers I would like to welcome into today's discussion: Dominik Jankowski, who is a Deputy Ambassador of Poland to NATO with a strong policy and think tank background, as well as our next speaker, Oana Popescu-Zamfir, who is a Director of the think tank Global Focus in Romania. Thank you once again for joining us today. I would like to pass the floor now to Tomáš, and looking forward to hearing more about the research you've conducted.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me, and then good afternoon in Central European times to the audience. I should probably start as a governmental employee with a disclaimer that this paper was actually done during my time in the government. I'm still with the select delegation to NATO. So first and foremost, everything that you find in a paper or everything that comes from me throughout today's discussion is really a reflection of my views, of the perspective that I have. It's no way, shape, or form an official output from the Slovak government. So a little bit of basic information about the paper. It has been written. It was a long process, I must admit. It took me almost like 2 years to put it together, but the good thing is that the many findings that I have operated with in the very initial stage are still valid, and I think it was a fun intellectual ride to work on this paper. I was trying to approach it. It's very difficult to avoid a national perspective on this. But I was trying to be kind of all-encompassing and not really looking at this issue through the Slovak perspective, but trying to get a regional approach. And obviously, the reason why I have chosen this topic was that I was always fascinated with regional security. The way how we usually conduct defense cooperation and security cooperation traditionally has been based on bilateral affairs. So we have one state and another that cooperate in some project of joint interest. That's what we call bilateral. But by time, and certainly after the Second World War, we have invented this great multilateral for like NATO specifically for defense and security, and the European Union for broader. And that really gives us the multilateral layer, and so many things get done at the multilateral layer. But countries get tempted to kind of fill in the hole between the two kind of vertical levels of doing defense policy, the bilateral and multilateral. And really, regional is the way to go. Not everywhere. It probably needs to be said that regional security cooperation is attractive and successful to different scale, different parts of the world. But for some reason, Central Europe seems to be attracted to this. And this is not just about B9, but we have different cooperative formats at regional level in the past. Probably the V4 is the label that resonates most with the wider transatlantic public, but we have the sort of 3Cs initiative and other projects. Obviously, you mentioned in your introduction that there is a specific driver behind B9. Approximately a decade ago, a series of events happened in Ukraine, conducted by Russia, that had led to a considerable rethink of security in Central Europe. And also, it was a kind of a rethink of what our political priorities are, because up to them, I would say the majority of countries look at the challenges through this perspective of economics and basically getting our living standards to the Western European living standards, but really Russian actions to a smaller scale in 2008 and then to a larger scale approximately a decade ago have led to a significant rethink. And obviously what happened in 2022 is the continuation of this process, quote unquote, on steroids. But it had led to a number of things happening at the national level, multilateral level, but also importantly at the regional level, that really seemed to be a catalyst of this regional security cooperation. And B9 was pretty quick, I think, in reaction, established in 2015, firstly existing as a fora for presidents, but today it's significantly wider. It's not just a place for the presidents to meet. We had ministerial meetings, we had meetings at the level of national security advisors, and it was created, and it still is a pretty flexible format. So it can adapt with a pretty good level of ease to the required situation and try to address that situation. So it's not rigid. I mean, the rigidness was kind of declined from the very beginning. I would say from an institutional point of view, it's even less codified as the V4 was, because V4, specifically in the area of defense, had long-term plans. It has action plans. So we have pieces of materials that are aimed to stimulate processes. At B9 level, we don't really have this. This is really about consultation-driven cooperation, I would say. And also, I touch upon this issue in the paper. I probably won't have time in my introductory remarks to go into details, but basically, it's also good to look at these regional formats and try to evaluate them, and try to evaluate them on the basis of the accomplishments. And I would say with V4, the problematic element is that, despite of the, I would say, a higher level of conceptual work that was done, I would argue that deliverables are not that outstanding. That's basically the point I'm approaching with B9. It really is different, because there were, as I basically wrote in the paper, two kind of logics or rationales driving this cooperation. One was a strategic. It was really about understanding what's behind the Russian action, and this is really a generational need to adapt our defense and security policy, and at so many different levels. Even at the levels when I would argue that it's not really happening, like economy and industry, I'm not entirely sure that we have adapted what we need to adapt. but also at the political level. And the political driver behind BE9 was a great idea of these countries to come together and basically to make sure that when at NATO level these issues or our priorities are dealt with, they become NATO priorities. So within NATO, we don't have blocks, we don't have caucuses, we don't have formal, semi-formal formats. That's not how we function. We are an alliance. But obviously, you do have this regional element very much present. And you can see how basically our national regional priorities were by time very nicely translated into NATO priorities. Obviously, NATO is a larger scale organization. It has what we call a 360-degree approach. So it's not really addressing issues, threats emanating from the east, but it has a pretty sizable southern dimension. It's trying to do multi-domain things. B9, I think, is rightly more limited in its priorities, but it has been very successful in kind of transponding those priorities from regional and national level to NATO level. And probably the Warsaw Summit is a great example, but also the Brussels Summit in 2021, when you can see that NATO has really adopted things that have been originating and being advocated by Central European leaders, like making sure that we have new sets of regional plans to defend if really needed. You have a great emphasis being now placed on deterrence. So basically getting us ready so everyone knows that we are committed to fight and defend each other, and that in itself should deter any kind of attempt against NATO territory. But so many other things that are sort of below the threshold of military reaction. This entire world of hybrid threats. And I think it was one of the main drivers behind B9 and national processes as well, because while we are mentioning Georgia and while we are mentioning repeated aggression against Ukraine, from a B9 perspective, these are external things, very close to us, but still external. But on the other side, you do have Russian actions that are taking place within our societies that are sort of became our internal security challenges that needs to be addressed as well. And that's where we are talking about addressing cyber threats, this entire spectrum of hybrid threats, but also building up resilience. That's something that we probably have not invested enough in the past. And that's, I'm getting into maybe the chapter about future priorities, because that's probably where we should go as an alliance, but more specifically as a Central European societies that are on the flank and they are most of the times also on the front line. You also mentioned that B9 was more active at NATO level. That's definitely true. I was trying to do research to get an as good idea as possible how much work has been done actually at the EU level, and it seems that there might have been a missed opportunity to work on EU level as well, because some of the challenges and those that are not primarily meant to be addressed by military action or military adaptation could have been actually done at the EU level, and EU could be more helpful than we may be realizing as of now. About the future priorities, because I think, when you are writing a paper, my aim was not to produce a piece of historical recollection. I think I was using the past as a mechanism to basically provide certain recommendations that we can work in the future. And obviously, basically my leitmotiv is that this is a work in progress. What has started in 2015 and what has gained kind of reps, and we have seen the acceleration of action adaptation at NATO level that needs to continue. And I think there is a regional role that we should play, making sure that frontline of NATO is actually a core of NATO in terms of the standards of security, that we are not in periphery. Yeah, we might be geographically speaking, but we have everything that we need to have to basically make sure that this part of NATO is as secure as any other part of NATO. And that obviously entails so many other things that nations have been working on either at the national level or multilateral level like the entire package of things that we label as military mobility. So making sure that we not only have assets that are important to defend NATO, but we actually have them in the right place in the right time, because that's really what makes this matrix to be really challenging, not only having them, but basically having the ability to move them swiftly to where they are needed. Because obviously there is a certain scarcity of tools that we are dealing with, certainly at the national and regional level. Russia is a formidable challenge. Obviously, we need to invest in defense in the future more, but we need to also find avenues how we can make those investments to work more meaningfully, and obviously doing things at NATO level, and also trying to use these regional processes to get those things done is, I think, the part of the answer that we should be seeking in the future in kind of making our societies more secure and keeping the level of stability that we have today, because that's going to be a gargantuan task, I think, in the future years to come. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, the scope of the paper. Obviously, you can read more about the internal world of B9 if you zoom in. There's a comparative elements that looks at V4 and 3C's initiative. Not always, I mean, not all of these kind of platforms are defense and security oriented, but they are regional. They have similar dimensions as B9, so I thought it might be an interesting case to compare. I'm not a comparative political scientist, but I always like this subfield because it's kind of gives you an interesting perspective from which you can see things, which we bureaucrats not always kind of opt for. That's probably an interesting statement.
Thank you, Tomáš. Did you want to add something to conclude your?
I wanted to start with what's presented, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. This was extremely insightful and interesting, and it was a pleasure to read a paper as well, because the truth is that B9 is one of these formats that we hear about from time to time in terms of initiatives, in terms of being like proactive regarding certain issues, but it's not probably as active as we would like to see it. But of course, this is like a question to you, but also to our other speakers. So you mentioned in the paper that it was a reactive format. It was established pretty quickly, but also proactive in a way. Whether this is the case in the recent years, I would like to now pass the floor to Oana Popescu-Zamfir for her thoughts, reflections on the paper, but also arguments that she would like to bring to the discussion.
Hi, and thank you very much for the very insightful presentation and paper. I'll try to keep this brief to have time for interaction, and just to leave you with a few ideas. One, I will just pick up on how Tomáš ended his presentation, and you actually continued by commenting that B9 is efficient, more so than other regional cooperation initiatives like the 3Cs and then B4, but perhaps there's more potential to it. And it very much resonates. I mean, the type of conversation that we're having very much reminds me of the conversations that have been buzzing lately around the EPC, the European Political Community, and its summits. Everybody was, and I mean, not everybody, but a lot of voices were very skeptical about a format where you wouldn't have institutionalization, and it would all be high level, it would all be consultative, no rules, no norms, and nothing that has to come out of it. And I think, you know, on every such occasion, the comment that I made when I was part of such formats, it was that consultation is underrated these days. I think with how much of our collective security and defense is in flux, the sheer role of leaders meeting and consulting with one another when there is a need for it, and B9 has been much more efficient than other regional initiatives, I think, precisely because the need is there. That's the first and foremost reason, and the threat perception across the region is relatively uniform, despite the differentiation that does take place among countries. So where there is a pressing need, I think there's a pressing need for consultation as well, and the will is there. So I'm really not very worried about whether there's going to be further layers of formalization of the B9 or not really. If it's going to diversify its topics, its formats, when it meets, and so on and so forth, I think it's simply just by virtue of bringing together all the players in the region and around topics that are getting more and more relevant, it will definitely have a role to fulfill. That said, I will also bring a very, I think, Romania-centered perception at this point, and say, well, you know, V4 is dead, long live B9. Let's just replace one letter and one number with another. They all sound very much the same anyway. Because what I think B9 brings to the table, joke aside, is that unlike V4, which was very comprehensive in its in how many topics it spanned, very diverse in its approaches, much more institutionalized in multiple ways. B9 is more extensive in its membership, but less, how should I call it, less integrated, perhaps, in how formalized it is. And I will repeat that I see this as an advantage. And I think with countries across the region being relatively unequal in how they deal with Russia and regional security, but having a clear perception that they do need to act on it. Having this wider membership, I think, really helps. It's inclusive. It brings together this diversity of perspectives and can balance out the occasional problems that this membership brings with it. And I'm clearly referring to Hungary first and foremost. So it is really a format that's big enough to accommodate the diversity across the region, but small enough to keep it narrow, focused, and have clearly articulated goals. I would say that for the future, obviously, Ukraine, and when I say Ukraine, I mean multiple things, from the war in Ukraine and how it's going to evolve, to Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic membership, to the future Ukraine reconstruction, to the reconsideration of regional security and how we can ensure it, both at the level of NATO, the alliance as a whole, and what the contribution of regional member states might be. All of these provide as many immediate opportunities for the countries of the region to come together and debate how they can work together better. We share common challenges. Tomáš's paper outlines some of these, so I won't repeat them. I will emphasize the fact that had it not been for the war in Ukraine, probably we wouldn't have pressed along with more north-south interconnection than we have honestly engaged in for a long time. And the 3 Seas initiative has it there, and there are many things that have been discussed throughout time, but they haven't really been implemented, that there was no feeling of a pressing need. Well, I think now there is. The resources are there and they're more easily available. There's a political will at the level of the alliance as well to support Central Eastern Europe in strengthening its military mobility, its interconnections. There's a lot that has to do with security in a wider sense, and in the sense of trade routes security, human security, everything that comes with it. Obviously, as Tomáš also said, hybrid threats are an important component of that. And I think the dynamic around strengthening this interconnectedness across the region, and leaving aside differences much more easily than before, that is clearly there, and it's been catalyzed by Russia's aggression on Ukraine. This will be even more important in the future. The war in Ukraine is likely to end at some point, but the tension in the region will remain for a long time. And I think these days following Russian elections have given us a little bit of an insight into Vladimir Putin's mind and his intentions for the coming years, and they're really not reassuring. So again, I think this will make up a big part of what B9 could come together around. Ukraine, NATO reform, and how the alliance will adapt to the very concrete changes in the security environment, from contributions out of GDP to joint purchases, to stocks, to supporting Ukraine and strengthening our own resilience, and so on and so forth. I think, because this will be touched upon, even if it doesn't really directly flow into the EU decision-making process, but the consultation is around joint security and defense. So I'm sure this will impact, to some extent, discussions around European strategic autonomy as well. So in a way, both are influenced. And with elections taking place across Europe and the US, and the transatlantic relationship very much in discussion in terms of how results in Washington are going to impact our collective security on the continent, there will be plenty of opportunity for countries that have notoriously relied on the US as the main contributor to regional security to discuss how we can consider not really the prospect of diversifying away from the US. We all hope that doesn't happen, but realistically speaking, it's something that we have to take into consideration. But how we can do more for our own resilience. So that's all from me at this point. I think it's just a few thoughts around a very solid and good paper. I would again, from a very selfish Romanian self-absorbed perspective, I would like to see the Black Sea be even more a part of B9 discussions, even more so as the alliance overall starts regarding the Black Sea as not just a one region, but as part of a wider security complex that extends in many ways all the way to the Mediterranean, but then also is tightly interrelated with the Baltic Sea and with the Nordic Sea. So I think there's a lot out there that we need to discuss, because this is still underrepresented at the level of the alliance. But more on this certainly during the Q&A.
Thank you, Oana. I would like to mention that 3 weeks ago we had another discussion on Black Sea security, and everybody who is with us today can actually see a discussion on the GMF YouTube channel. And it was one of my questions, to what extent actually we can expect that B9 can prioritize like a common Black Sea security initiative in the coming years, especially given that it's also a discussion at the NATO level. However, NATO doesn't have a comprehensive strategy towards the region and involving all the countries from the Black Sea region. I would like to now pass the floor to Dominik Jankowski with his thoughts and reflections on the paper and his contribution to the discussion.
Thanks, and many thanks to GMF for the invitation to speak. Let me start by congratulating Thomas on an excellent paper. It took you only 2 years, good. B9 is a very, in a way, it is an interesting discussion. B9 has evolved over the period that Thomas described. So there's not so much literature on B9 and what B9 has done. So this is a real added value, trying to put into one document a little bit of history with a clear guidance towards the future when it comes to NATO. B9, and let me start by saying B9 is a NATO beast. This is primarily a format that discusses security policy, at least from where I sit and how I see the B9 evolution. As Thomas put it very clearly, I think it's good that it has a very clear strategic guidance from the top level in our countries. So by default, it gives us kind of a strategic overview what we need to do as delegations, as nations here in this alliance. That's one. Second, B9 is a format that, in fact, works in NATO. I'm not saying we agree on every single element. NATO, by definition, is a platform where we discuss different views and different perception in order to put it to one common denominator, which is called transatlantic unity. So I'm not so much focused on the differences between B9 countries. They will exist, they will continue to exist. But I think what B9 offers is a coherent view of the eastern flank on the most critical elements in what we present in NATO and how we operate in NATO. B9 is meeting on a regular basis here in this alliance in different formats and different levels. So this coordination exists. It's not just, we get guidance from the heads of state and government once in a while, and then there is no follow-up on a practical daily basis here in NATO. But there is. So I think, as Oana put it very rightly, this dialogue element, this constant consultation element is the biggest added value when it comes to NATO. I've looked a little bit at what Thomas is suggesting as the way ahead and trying to look what should be the top priorities of B9 for the next few years. And let me start by saying I've looked at the recent report by the Secretary General, the annual report, which basically summarizes the last 12 months, what has been done, what has been achieved. And I look at the stats when it comes to B9. And I think this region is doing pretty well on a lot of fronts. We are doing very well on defense spending. I'm not saying all of us, but I'm saying in principle, the trajectory is very clear. Of course, with some countries doing much more within the grouping, but the direction of travel is absolutely positive. The same goes not only when it comes to defense spending as part of GDP, but also the major equipment that is being purchased by major military equipment that is purchased by B9 countries. So equipment expenditures as a share of defense expenditure in most cases, in all of the cases, B9 is spending more than 20% of those defense expenditures on new big military equipment. And the same goes for, when public is being asked in those countries whether NATO is relevant, whether we believe in NATO, the general feeling, of course, there are countries where the trajectory is close to 95 or 98% in B9, but in principle, the eastern flank / B9 is very pro-NATO, very transatlantic. So we have this gives us a huge political capital that we can that we if we manage the capital properly, the leverage that we have in this building is on increase. And right now, back to the suggestions, and I'll maybe wrap up with that Thomas is putting forward. I do believe that one of the top priorities that B9/Eastern flank should do right now is to look how we can, in a long-term sustainable manner, support Ukraine through NATO mechanism and instruments. EU is doing a lot, much more than NATO as an organization. We are having external forums such as UDCG or Ramstein format and others which are supporting Ukraine. We need to make sure we have that sustainability element incrementally built up in NATO. And I think B9 will be instrumental in moving this direction towards that goal. Bringing Ukraine closer to NATO means basically that NATO works every single day in a sustainable manner on Ukrainian interoperability, on training, and on supporting Ukraine military needs. That brings me to the second biggest pillar, where I do believe B9 has a critical role to play, which is implementation of deterrence and defense agreed already documents and taskings, as we call them in NATO. And I think Thomas mentioned some of them: regional plans, executability of those plans. I think in principle, when you look at the map, almost all B9 countries are having a deployment of NATO troops of a kind on its territory. It gives us a tremendous opportunity to make sure that we not only contribute and make it operational, but also strategically in a coherent manner within the region, think about how to sustain those deployments and how to transform those deployments into something more, I will use that word, permanent in a way. And of course, there are elements linked to that, which Thomas is also mentioning in his paper, like air and missile defense assets, critical when we are looking at lessons identified from Russian aggression against Ukraine. Bigger advancement and cooperation between the countries on military mobility. But I would say also, and that's something that I'm missing maybe a little bit here, is the added value of B9 countries in bringing together the NATO-EU cooperation even closer. So I would say, military mobility by definition is, for example, one of the critical elements of that cooperation. But I do believe B9 will be in fact instrumental in moving that discussion forward. Which leads me to my final point with regard when it comes to deterrence and defense, which is logistics/infrastructure necessary for that logistics. And I just wanted to applaud Thomas for mentioning the extension of the NATO pipeline system and the broader discussion that we're having in NATO when it comes to logistic, fuel infrastructure. Big topic, important topic. All of the B9 countries are on the same page. And I think, once again, there is a necessity that we jointly push that agenda forward. My final point is on partners at risk, so partnership policy, where once again I saw over the last few years a lot of coherence on how those countries from B9 are working together on bringing closer or enhancing resilience and defense sector reforms in countries such as Moldova, Georgia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so partners at risk is also something that we as B9 should take care and invest more, practically, financially, and military. And I'll stop here and over back to you, Asya.
Thank you, Dominik, for this reflection. And I would like to maybe give the opportunity to Tomáš to engage with some of the points that you and Oana made before asking further questions. And I would like to encourage everybody who is in the audience to write questions, and I'm going to make sure that I bring them to our speaker's attention. Please, Tomáš.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm grateful for the responses. There isn't much that I would add. I think I do agree with what has been said, maybe bits and pieces. Ideas about future institutionalization of B9. I don't think that it would make a credible case to say now that it would fly in the foreseeable future. I have done a series of interviews as part of my field research to the project, and actually I've asked this question to every single interviewee that I had, whether they would support some kind of institutionalization or like a permanent secretariat to basically come up with ideas or a policy planning unit or whatever. I can recollect one single person actually responding me positively. So I think there is a general appreciation of how B9 functions, and there is a recognition that we probably found a very good modality in the beginning. That's probably also a good political scientist perspective, that if you want to run an institution or a platform or some kind of venture of cooperation, it's very important to strike the positive note in the beginning on how you set basically the level of cooperation, because if you do something maybe too ambitious, then you limit yourself. Other ideas, partners as risk. Thank you very much for mentioning it. I can see this being a kind of a prominent part of the future B9 policy, because if I kind of recollect the official political and foreign policy positions of these countries, then you can see actually pretty good level of harmony when it comes to Moldova, Bosnia, Georgia, and all these kind of theaters and places. I think we are actually in a common ground in B9. Interesting thing is that, as it was mentioned in the past 10 years, we did not really have a full uniformity of views among each of the governments involved. But I would say that the impact on B9 has been relatively limited. You can look at V4 cooperation and how it actually suffered in a sense because of this disunity of political views and views among the highest level of leadership. I wouldn't go as far as claiming that B9, the V4 is dead officially. It was close to a sort of clinical death. I would say even in the past, it really had bad periods, but it was always able to reconnect. So I think there is a sense of maybe sense is not a good word, but there is a rationale in maintaining this for even in bad weather. And there were moments where Slovakia was an outlier country. There were moments where, objectively stated, maybe Hungary was perceived as an outlier country. As long as you can manage those relationships, V4 may persist. But again, then the question is, what's the added value of such an organization? With B9, I don't think that there is a question what's the added value. We need to continue and finish the process we had started 10 years ago. And all the sets of rationales and factors that were present in the beginning are still very valid. And I think they will be valid a decade from now as well. The focus on the Baltics versus Black Sea, B9 maybe took a more solid footing on the Baltics. Don't really know why, except that probably it was the easier thing to do or more natural. I think we had done work on this before, and from my perspective, it was relatively easy to come with deliverables for the Baltics. So placing forward, placing troops there, working on air and missile defense, air policing. Now with Finland and Sweden being members of the Union, I think the whole Baltics theater looks now significantly different. But yeah, very wisely put, I think the Black Sea region is a place where we should go, and we should concentrate more what we as an alliance can do, in addition to what has been done so far. And obviously that's a good opportunity for B9 as well.
Thank you, Tomáš. Indeed, the Black Sea region it's in a way more diverse in terms of like different policies. There are different security challenges, and maybe just to finish this topic, I wanted to ask you: do you see a possibility for the Black Sea, let's say, future security strategy to become a priority? of the B9? Is there space for seeing this format pushing very specific initiatives? And if not the Black Sea security strategy, what else should we expect in terms of concrete initiatives that can enhance regional security?
I think that example is a very good one. I think if you're looking for some kind of action packages that might come from B9, that piece of document could be it. But instead of kind of guessing what's the success rate for that, I would probably try to accentuate instead that it's very important for a given country to come with leadership on this topic. And I think which country I'm pointing to. I think if there will be a big interest and there will be someone who can spearhead that, it really does have a good chance of flying. But it needs to have its owner and basically sort of master, just like as it would work in any other kind of organization. I think even some of the logics is very similar in the B9 as well. But inherently, I think it's something that could be tried and it eventually could work. Yeah.
Now, I would like to turn to the other speakers because we have a lot of questions already in the chat. And in her presentation, Oana pointed to the external context, to the series of elections that we are experiencing this year, both in the US and Europe. And some of the questions in the chat are related to this. So maybe you can develop further your argument about what we can expect. So one of the questions is, how would the re-election of former US President Donald Trump affect the security, or will affect the security policies of the B9 and NATO? Could this strain relations between the B9 and the US? And related to this is also, the elections in Europe, and to what extent the political situations on both sides of the ocean warrant new strategic considerations by the B9 countries.
Yeah, I mean, let me try to kind of answer all of these together. The result of elections in the US is probably the most consequential event that's going to influence Euro-Atlantic strategy, other than what Vladimir Putin might do in the meantime. And there's clearly no easy answer to this, but until maybe just a few months ago, when it became quite clear that Donald Trump is not a negligible candidate, most member states were contemplating the possibility of a new Trump mandate from afar, but without necessarily delving into what the actual consequences would be and whether there is any way that we can prepare for that. So I think one of the main tasks for B9, even before the Washington summit, is to actually really consult on what relations with the US might look like in the future with one and another result. I'm sure this is the form is going to be less political than I'm describing it now. It's probably not going to be as upfront, but it's going to be about relations with the US should the US change course in any way in foreign policy. One thing that the B9 could do is to take upon itself as trusted partners of the US in the region to do their utmost to influence a potential President Trump to not change course on the fundamentals of US security policy. Frankly speaking, there is no short-term solution for the worst case scenario, for the absence of the US or or a significant withdrawal of US resources from the region. So perhaps one of the core tasks that lie waiting for us is to try whatever we can to make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure that supporting Ukraine to the very end and to define that end in a realistic way in Ukraine's advantage, and also to deny Vladimir Putin the ability to influence decision-making processes on the continent when it comes to security, because this is really the stakes for us in a very direct way. It's not just for Ukraine. Moving forward again, especially after the Russian elections, I think the medium term and the long term task for NATO members is to make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't get a say in the security decisions and foreign policy decisions that we make on the continent. And that is something that we need to work with Washington on, whether there's going to be a President Biden or President Trump. The second thing, obviously, is to look at what we can do if push comes to shove. And that means stepping up our contribution in terms of defense and security, looking at how we can strengthen resilience. I see there's a question that looks at France, and I'm thinking also that B9 could explore how we could strengthen our cooperation with core actors that are interested and active in the region. France indeed is one of them. Obviously, Germany is another. We have 2 new NATO members, Sweden and Finland, with very similar agendas, very similar threat perceptions as Central and Eastern European members of NATO. All of these things could be explored, how by working together better, we can perhaps, on the one hand, make up for potential turns in US policy, but on the other hand, irrespective of whether the US changes course or not, just how we can work together more effectively with partners that are outside of B9, but are key partners for us. The Netherlands, again, is another. We have Mark Rutte running for NATO Secretary General, so obviously that increases the obvious influence of Netherlands in the region. So, you know, my answer will be very incomplete because, again, contemplating a withdrawal of US interest and resources from the region just changes everything inside the alliance. But that doesn't mean that, you know, that's no excuse to just sit with our fingers crossed, hope nothing happens, and delay thinking of how we can work with that scenario if it becomes real.
I would like to also give the opportunity to Dominik and Tomáš to engage with this question, because it's the question of the year in terms of how politics can influence security priorities in Europe. I see that Dominik is walking. I hope this doesn't prevent you from engaging with the question.
I just wanted to say NATO is a very dynamic place, and I was just informed that I need to start moving to another meeting. But of course, I will stay with the GMF discussion until the very end. But I'll be transferring myself to a different location for presence deployment, if I may call it like that. Apologies for that. Look, I think Oana is very right. In a way, B9 offers us that very special, flexible way of interacting with other countries. By definition, of course, once again, from a NATO angle, this starts, at least how I see things, this starts at looking who is deploying forces on our territory. So, you know, US, Germany, France, UK, Canada, and of course, the Netherlands and others. this creates this unique network of allies who are basically kind of interlinked with our security. That's one. Second, of course, things also have changed since 2022. More and more allies are stepping up and being more vocal when it comes to supporting Ukraine in much more kind of robust way. Like that. When I say robust, I say, discussions about strategic dilemmas, the recent French initiative. I think, once again, of course, NATO is a beast where everything is being defined by political dynamics. I've been to NATO such a long time that I still remember we were brain dead, we were obsolete, we withdrew from Afghanistan, and other things that kind of undermined our thinking about this alliance. But then 2022 came, the Russian invasion came, and I think I do see a renewed purpose of unity here. B9 is playing a critical role. Of course, the dynamics in the US will be defining that, and they will be changing a lot of things after November. And I think both ways. I think our assumption then, when we'll have a Biden administration 2.0, nothing changes in NATO is also not true. There is a growing pressure, and that's probably an element that we'll need to take into consideration. That's maybe one additional comment to what I take from Tomáš's report. It's China. It's how we are going to factor in China into our broader thinking. Of course, it's about resilience. Of course, it's about technology and innovation, but it's also about kind of political weight we are going to put behind the Chinese discussion here in NATO. And I think that's important. Let's not forget about it, but let's not also overthink what's going to happen in November. That's kind of my personal approach to it.
So maybe as a follow-up to Tomáš, do you see this potential of B9 to emancipate or to take a more leading role in case this is necessary, in case the political context requires this and changes within this year? Tomáš, could you can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, I just for a second thought that you are still addressing these questions to Dominik. I'm sorry, I misheard. So yeah, on Trump, here we are again. We thought once will be enough, but it is a realistic opportunity that he will be president again, and obviously it's very difficult to foresee what will happen. I can probably foresee the way how we in Central Europe are going to communicate, because knowing his priorities, because with him you probably talk about priorities, you don't really talk about strategy, because he has admitted a number of times that he doesn't really have a fixed strategy. He likes to look at things from a fresh perspective and basically have his opinions ready in a moment. I think what Central Europe will try to communicate him that maybe he should look how we were doing on things that were his priority, like burden sharing, like investing into defense, like taking these things really seriously, not just talking about them back then when he was a president for the first time, and look at how much we have progressed since then. And with any other president, I think this would be already enough. With him, you just simply don't know, because I think we have started to work on the homework in Europe in general, but also in Central and Eastern Europe, and we are doing fine, but we need to get a chance to finish the job. And I'm just struggling to know and to forecast how much of a source of disruption he is going to be, even compared to his first term. When it comes to the role of France, obviously I mentioned in the paper that the B9 has recognized the value of consulting Western senior leaders. There had been a meeting with the US President, NATO Secretary General, German Chancellor, not with the French President, interestingly, but obviously looking at the French politics and Macron's politics from the perspective of last month, you see that he's really accelerating. He's really trying to find a position that maybe he can advocate in the next months and years. So I think that's the national way to go. But there would have to be something solid, behind the meeting. It just cannot be a meeting for the purposes of meeting. I think it's a question to what extent France does have a strategy towards the region. I think all of us can see the increased presence of France in the region. That's very encouraging, if you ask me. And obviously, this is the way to go, but it will be very delicate in November. And I think what was mentioned by Dominik, that Europe needs to step up. I mean, we knew that this will come at some point. It was difficult to foresee the context and what will be the conditions, but I think we have this understanding, we have had this for years, that Europe will need to do more sooner or later, under some kind of conditions, for some kind of reasons, but simply investing and working more on defense at European scale, but also in Central European scale, is a must. It will define probably the rest of my professional career. It will happen irrespective of Trump or not. Obviously, he has proved to be a big disruptor, and I'm struggling to see how much he's going to disrupt. Similarly, I'm not that afraid of the Russian factor and Putin's factor, because I think by now, hopefully, everyone gets what's his objective. And obviously, you may say that there are still, in Europe, hesitation about him and basically calibrating our policy towards Russia. But what's sure is that we have lost a big deal of naivete that some European leaders had towards him until the Belgrade stage. So I'm much more concerned about internal things in the West than basically external factors.
Now, the discussion that Europe should have more active role in taking care of its own security, it's been here for a while already. But if we focus specifically on B9, there is a question from one of our attendees. Is there any chance for Turkey to join B9 in the future, in the context of talking about potential cooperations and who else can actually contribute to the regional security? I'm just offering this question to everybody who wants to contribute, because Turkey is a very specific case. It's a very interesting and important country when it comes to Black Sea security, to regional security, but also as a NATO member when it comes to its own political agendas. Maybe Tomáš, or...
let me try to pick this up just to say that.
Please, Oana, go ahead.
Look, I honestly, I don't have an opinion on Turkey joining the B9. I think it would imbalance perhaps the format, to be honest. But I think the bottom line of what we've been discussing is that we have a golden opportunity now to influence the agenda of major security players. Turkey is one of them. The US, as we've discussed, is obviously the biggest one. France, Germany, the Netherlands, the Scandinavians, and others are also relevant. At a time when we are redefining our security agenda, our security contributions, the way we see this play out politically and militarily, it is of paramount importance for B9 together to be able to address these players. And I'm thinking now from Turkey, which we have been able to feel, I think, in Romania, having a very good working relationship with Turkey on all things defense, but not one that has produced any significant results. I think we feel that the entire weight of how imbalanced the relationship is and how big a player Turkey is on the Black Sea, for instance, and how nothing really moves and there's no Black Sea strategy without Turkey. And so to be able to engage with Turkey, which is a complicated partner, not necessarily a hostile one or difficult in the sense that Hungary has been a difficult partner, but one with a very complex security environment, and then even more complex behavior. So to be able to engage with Turkey from a position of unity, of benign, speaking with one voice, even if the objectives are not perhaps the most ambitious at start, I think is extremely important in driving things forward. The same can be said about, for instance, because I'm not to obsess over the Black Sea, but France, for instance, is elaborating its Black Sea strategy, which it only published a few years ago, and now it is working on deepening it, without, in my perception, enough consultation with the literal member states and the ones that are that have a closer and a more direct perspective. So maybe again there's an opportunity there to engage with France, to discuss with France before President Macron comes out with his own ideas, to try and provide input from the region, because that's going to be significant. France is going to continue being a significant actor. They have troops here. They are a very important player. And so the stakes in having this kind of dialogue with the key partners are much higher now than they used to be in the past, but the opportunity is also there more than in the past. So that's where I see the main potential for B9 in the future.
Tomáš or Dominik, in case you'd like to
maybe just
say
quickly
something to this question. Yes.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, the B9 has already been approaching external powers, let's put it this way, allies. There is nothing that would prevent it doing it from Turkey once we find a good topic to engage them with. But going in the direction of formal or semi-formal extension and including Turkey, I think I'm fairly skeptical to that for the reasons that have been mentioned. It's a big country. It would do the regional balance would be very different, because yes, you are getting a very capable partner, but again, Turkey has its own diplomatic strategy. It could be delicate to accommodate. It has its own policy towards the Middle East. It's an actor that is present in a different theaters than most of the Central European countries are. Maybe it's not such a distinct actor from Romanian and Bulgarian perspective, but I think it's a very distinct actor from Czech or Slovak perspective, and probably the Baltic perspective is also similar to this. So obviously you can do all sorts of practical defense cooperation with the Turkish side. It has a proven track record, so there is the pragmatic way to go for it. But for a high-profile political engagement, I'm fairly. I don't really see it from the perspective of where I'm standing now.
And this fits well into the discussion about the opportunities and limitations ahead of the format. A question related to the initiatives that B9 could possibly engage with. Could there be more initiatives similar to Czech ammunition for Ukraine project? Would B9 be able to advance EU security policy this way, in light also of Ukraine joining NATO? Maybe Dominik can jump in here.
Yeah, so quickly back to the question about Turkey. I share the assessment of Thomas. I do believe we can always do B9 plus one, B9 plus other formats if necessary. But I think there is something unique in how we see and assess things currently. So nothing prevents us from adding ad hoc countries as partners to talk to on a regular basis, but probably making an institutional, it's not going to fly for the reasons that Thomas mentioned. On other initiatives, I'll give you a very concrete one that maybe we haven't really made enough stratcom around it when it comes to benign engagement into pushing that forward. But Tomáš was also engaged in that, and we had some recent discussions in NATO on establishing the first ever NATO-Ukraine joint structure, the Joint Analysis, Training and Education Center, which will be located in Poland. And it was, in fact, thanks to a coherent approach by B9 and joint engagement from B9 countries in moving that particular element forward, which in a way is also a testimony that we have joint interest when it comes to working with Ukraine and long-term commitment to Ukraine joining this alliance. That's not, of course, not going to happen overnight, and we know it. We know where the red lines are. We know also where the red lines within the B9 are. But I think it shows that when it comes to practical cooperation, tangible elements, we can come up with ideas that we can support and then get others, actors, and allies on board. So in the end, I think it is possible, and I think B9, when it comes to practical support to Ukraine, and NATO as a platform for it is more or less on the same page. Of course, there are famous red lines that we know about coming from some of the countries here when it comes to lethal support to Ukraine being coordinated by NATO. But this is a bigger issue, a bigger challenge that goes beyond B9. So in short, yes, I think those kind of very practical projects will be a kind of a driving force for the B9 in NATO, of course. There should be kind of a direct implementation of our strategic vision laid out by our head of state and government. But I hope by this concrete example, I've answered the question.
Now, Oana mentioned that B9 is a big enough or like a broad format to accommodate different perspectives. But a question that maybe Tomáš can answer: to what extent Hungary's stance on Russia in the specific case of the war in Ukraine represents a challenge to the unity of the format, and how this unity can be maintained in terms of like having shared priorities and shared security vision for the future?
Yeah, thank you. I think I knew that it was coming at some point, addressing the elephant in the room. Yes, I mean, Hungary's foreign policy has been quite different to other B9 countries, and I basically hinted on this when I was talking about the V4, that basically there you can feel really a sizable impact. The B9 has been so far successful at avoiding that. I think it really depends what we are talking about, because even in Hungary's position, if we are talking about increasing our defense and deterrence capacity to make sure that we can address the Russian threats, and doing internal changes, because that's what meant basically changing our plans and making ourselves, providing ourselves better warfighting capability that we hope we will never use, but we want to have that capability. There, I think Hungary had proved to be constructive. Also, Dominik mentioned the JATEC initiative, the Joint Analysis Training Education Center between Ukraine and NATO. I have been personally involved in that, and I can say that the Hungarians were actually very constructive. So yeah, I mean, there is a political level of the discussion which puts Hungary in a kind of specific position. But then, if you are talking about things that are important for the eastern flank inwards, then we were always able to find a compromise so far, and I don't really see why this would change to a significant manner. Obviously, when we are not talking about those issues, but about, for instance, Ukraine, how to support Ukraine in the future in a significant, tangible, meaningful manner, then you see that basically the positions of those countries diverge. But again, the way how we can work around this is that basically you have this bilateral level of assistance that's being provided. That's why I started my introduction, that it's important to understand that when we are talking about defense security cooperation, we are talking about bilateral, regional, and then multilateral. And if something doesn't work at one level, you still have other levels that you can utilize. And the way basically how we have been helping Ukraine, despite of these national delicacies, is that we were able to use the appropriate level at the appropriate time with the appropriate basically challenges.
And Oana, maybe you can, if you'd like to engage with this question, but also when it comes to Romania, which you mentioned a few times, can we expect, or like, what are the initiatives that can be brought to the format coming from Romania? Because we talk about Bucharest 9, this is how the format started. So where is Romania today when we talk about B9 initiatives?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of them might be very concrete, so not necessarily strategic, but rather of the sort that we are seeing. For instance, the F-16 training center for Ukrainian pilots. There will be a lot of need for training for Ukraine's armed forces. There will be a lot of need for transfer of expertise. Tomáš has touched on some of these aspects in his paper. So it would be hard for me to say right now what kind of specific initiatives might come out of Romania. I think most of them will clearly be in terms of supporting Ukraine, because that's going to be the main strategic objective for all of B9. But I think what's needed at this point is really translating our strategic objectives into concrete action. So really looking at how we can work together, perhaps various mini formats of cooperation in providing Ukraine with the kind of support that it needs is one way to go. One of the questions was whether the Czech initiative to crowdsource and crowdfund support for Ukraine is something that can be replicated. And honestly, we need to be creative. I mean, such initiatives, I think, need to be replicated. And when I say such initiatives, I mean not just exactly this type, but anything that will help us supplement the capabilities that we currently have, and where we do fall short as compared to the needs. So mini formats of cooperation might be something that could emerge from B9, and I do see Romania play a part in this. I think Bucharest is more active in actually taking concrete steps forward these days than it has normally been until now. I am a bit disappointed with the lack of more strategic thinking in Bucharest, and that's something that I believe is lacking, because honestly, Romania's approach has been for a long time to acknowledge the fact that we are unable in this region to face up to the Russian threat without significant input from the US and other partners. And so the main stakes for Bucharest have been to make sure that we have boots on the ground, that we have partners with troops here being actively engaged in our defense. But that has also brought about a bit of outsourcing of strategic thinking and decision-making to partners in Washington and other capitals. London also, because we haven't mentioned it, but the UK continues to be a very important security partner. So I think these days, the feeling that I have is that we're slowly catching up a little bit and trying to recover some of the capacity for strategic thinking and decision making, and coming up with initiatives that we have maybe not lost, but set aside for a while as we were looking to more senior partners to provide most
Thank you, Oana. We have a few minutes left. I would like to conclude with a quick round and last question for all of you. What is the key priority that B9 should try to convince the other NATO members about, and to find unity about, in terms of, like we talked about, enhanced military capabilities. We talked about different ways of like increasing regional cooperation and like more strategic thinking. But also from Tomáš's paper, what I've learned is that there is still, the voice, let's say, of B9 is not as well heard as the format expected, for example, in the very beginning when it was launched. So very quickly, a minute each, maybe starting from Dominik, Tomáš, and Oana.
Look, I don't think there's one single priority that we need to focus on right now. I think it's important that in the current security environment, we elements here. I've mentioned at the beginning what I do believe are the main kind of pillars of our engagement within NATO. To recap them, Ukraine and how we are bringing Ukraine closer to NATO membership, deterrence and defense, basically implementing what we have agreed, and third, looking at those vulnerable partners as risk that we need to do more. But let me add one element that I haven't mentioned, and I think it's, like looking throughout the whole discussion, what's the added value of this region, what's the added value of B9? It's also our technological edge. I think, and I've looked at it recently, and in NATO, we are, of course, right now looking how to enhance our technological cooperation through Diana, so the accelerator of NATO and NATO Innovation Fund. And we have this amazing capabilities and human resources in the region. I mean, B9 could become a tech hub for this alliance. So, look, I think, once again, those four kind of pillars should be our driving. We should be driving that agenda forward, but I would not say there's one single issue where B9 should be like focusing on. I think right now that would be also detrimental to our ability to build coalitions within the alliance and to push for a broader set of issues which are making NATO stronger.
Okay, 1 minute for Tomáš and the last one for Oana.
Thank you very much. Maybe I will not even use my 1 minute because I have made some claims about what should be done in the future in the paper, and everyone can revisit it. Also, I am struggling to pick one because there are so many things, and it's not absolutely clear which would be the one if it was me. But probably supporting Ukraine at political level and also at practical level is something that is really important, certainly in the upcoming months and maybe years. Because the way how the aggression ends is going to have a direct impact on us, and it's going to have impact on everything we do. So basically, keep on supporting Ukraine. It's a cliche by now, but it's an extremely important thing. Even now we're in a third year, maybe it's even more important now than it has ever been. So that would be one thing, and one from a more tangible or specific area. From my perspective, it's to build up, making sure that allies help us to build up a better ability to protect our skies. It's one of the major lessons learned from the conflict in Ukraine. And also, if we try to envisage how a war between, God forbid, a war or aggression of Russia to NATO territory would look like, probably the air domain would play a very, very major role, even probably larger than it plays in Ukraine. And I think this is something where our priority should go. And I think this is already appreciated in Central and Eastern Europe, and it's just need to finish the work that we have already started.
Thank you. Oana, last word is yours.
I might seem to be contradicting myself because I earlier said B9 would be very much about concrete initiatives, but I do have one concern, which is political, and I think the B9 should really play an instrumental role in avoiding a worst case scenario. Look, we can feel war fatigue across Europe already. It's gonna get worse. it's going to get worse for Ukraine. It's going to get more complicated. And the desire and the willingness to support Ukraine might be dwindling throughout this year. If we give up on maximal objectives and evolve toward a position where, out of fear of escalation, we tend to accommodate Putin's own objectives, then that's going to give him a significant edge in continental security. So I think the B9 should be all about pressing Western partners to not give in to pressure from Russia and to not give up on Ukraine in terms of its territorial integrity, and not make it easy for Putin not to, not push Ukraine into negotiations for the sake of peace at any cost, because any dent that we make in international law and norms and principles and values is going to come back to hit us sooner rather than later. So I do think the B9 will play a key role, will have a key role to play in making sure that doesn't happen, and we don't engage in the kind of transactional politics that Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump would like to see us engage in.
Thank you all for this discussion. This was extremely insightful, very interesting, and thank you for everybody in the audience who joined us today. Once again, the discussion has been recorded, and you can find it later on the GMF YouTube channel. And please read Tomáš A's paper on B9. A lot of important points about the future initiatives and the potential of this format. Thank you once again. I wish you a good rest of the day, and join us for the next event of the GMF.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the moderation, Asya.
Thank you.